97% of businesses that enter a competitive market will never escape it. Not because they lacked talent, not because they lacked capital, not because the product was wrong. Because they entered the fight at the wrong level. They competed on price. They competed on features. They raced each other towards zero and called it strategy. I have watched empires make this exact mistake. Rome, the largest military conglomerate in human history, poured its legions into every market it touched, and for 30 years. It needed something I had so badly that it sent its most powerful men to my table, not as conquerors, as partners. The year is 2026, and the trap has not changed. Only the market has. Stripe processes $800 billion in payments per year, not because they offered the lowest fees, but because they became the infrastructure layer that every developer built their product on top of. Ripping out Stripe does not mean switching payment processors. It means rebuilding the product. That is not a pricing advantage. That is a structural dependency. You are fighting a fair fight, and a fair fight is the only fight where both sides lose. I am Cleopatra. History has spent 2,000 years trying to reduce me. They wrote that I seduced my way to power, that I was ruled by vanity, by romantic obsession, by desperate survival. They needed that narrative to be true, because the alternative was far more dangerous. The alternative was a woman who understood supply chains better than Caesar, who read 6 languages and could model a macroeconomic dependency in real time, who looked at the most powerful military force on Earth and saw not a threat, but a distribution channel. Egypt, under my rule, was not a country. It was a vertically integrated holding company with a monopoly on grain, the singular resource that fed 1 million Roman citizens every single year. 1 million. Rome had the armies. Rome had the infrastructure. Rome had the capital markets. But I had the grain. And without the grain, Rome had a riot. Not an empire. Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were not romances. They were the 2 most significant B2B enterprise agreements in the ancient world. I did not choose them because I loved them. I chose them because they controlled the enforcement mechanism I needed to protect my monopoly position. They had the army. I had the supply chain. The market called it a love affair. I called it a strategic joint venture, and it worked. Here is what is happening right now. In 2026, a SaaS founder raises a Series A, $8 million. They build a solid product, real customer love, clean execution. Then they open their competitor's pricing page and they discount themselves by 20%. They call it strategic market entry, but is not. It is the exact moment they handed the market their margin, their positioning, and their future. Compare that to what Figma did. Figma did not enter the design market at a lower price than Adobe. Figma made the entire design process collaborative and browser native, so so that every product team in the world had a reason to move their entire workflow onto Figma's infrastructure. Adobe spent $20 billion trying to acquire the bottleneck instead of competing with it. And when that deal collapsed, Adobe paid a $1 billion termination fee just to leave the table. $1 billion to leave. That is not a pricing story. That is a dependency story. In 47 TC. I watched the same pattern destroy kingdoms, city-states surrounding Alexandria, fully aware they could not match Egypt's scale, still entered the price war. They optimised their logistics. They built faster roads. They hired cheaper labour. None of them survived the decade. Because Egypt did not compete on supply. Egypt was the supply. When you compete on price, you are telling the market that the only difference between you and your competitor is a number on a page. The question is not how to compete better. The question is how to stop competing entirely and start owning the bottleneck. In January of 48 BC, I was in exile. My brother Ptolemy XIII had seized the throne with military backing. He controlled Alexandria, the treasury, the army. I controlled nothing, except one strategic insight. The most powerful man alive was camped 50 miles away, and he needed something I had. I did not send a diplomatic envoy. I did not petition through official channels. I did not wait for a meeting to be scheduled. I had my attendants wrap me in a merchant's carpet and smuggle me directly into Caesar's private quarters at night. In that room, before he had time to construct a defence, I was already building the deal. Egypt's entire grain infrastructure, 1 million tonnes of supply per year, in exchange for his military enforcement of my rightful position. He gets the resource base that funds his political wars in Rome. I get the army that reclaims my market position. That exchange has a name in modern business strategy: a strategic alliance with Asymmetric Resource Exchange. You identify the dominant player in your market, the entity with capital, distribution, and reach, but with a precise operational gap. Notion identified this gap inside Microsoft's entire productivity suite, not the spreadsheet, not the email. The connective tissue between them, the shared workspace where a team thinks together. By the time Microsoft built Loop to replicate it, entire companies had migrated their institutional memory into Notion. The switching cost was not financial, and it was architectural. You are not their vendor, you are their bottleneck. And the bottleneck always captures the margin. In 41 BC, Mark Antony summoned me to Tarsus. He had 30,000 soldiers at his back. He controlled the entire Eastern Roman theatre. And he sent a routine diplomatic messenger, demanding my presence. I did not arrive as summoned. I arrived 3 days late, on a ship with a gilded stern, purple silk sails, silver oars moving in perfect time to live musicians, dressed as the goddess Aphrodite, surrounded by attendants moving through clouds of perfumed smoke. The entire city of Tarsus came to the harbour. Antony sat in the forum, alone, because every Roman in the city had left to watch me arrive. Was this vanity? Was this ego? No. It was a cold, calculated demonstration of one single principle. The product with the highest perceived value wins every negotiation before a single word is spoken. In 2026, your brand is your purple sail. Your onboarding sequence is the moment the city comes to the harbour. Your case study is the grain fleet approaching from the horizon. Every touch point must radiate one signal. You do not need this deal to survive. Now do this. Audit the first 3 interactions a prospect has with you: your response time, your first deliverable, your opening price frame. Each one is either broadcasting need or broadcasting architecture. One closes at 60%, the other negotiates on terms. When you are perceived as the only viable solution, pricing resistance disappears entirely. The client stops asking whether they can afford you. They start asking whether they qualify to work with you. That inversion is the architecture of inelastic demand. In today's world, the founders who will control their industries are not the ones working harder than their competitors. They are the ones who have permanently detached their revenue from their hours. My grain fleet did not run one route. It ran 1,000 routes simultaneously, each ship following a precise protocol, arriving on schedule, executing without requiring my direct oversight. That was leverage at scale, but in 30 BC. The architecture is identical today. You build AI content systems that generate at volume and distribute across 6 platforms simultaneously. The agency's doing this in 2026, combining language models for research, image generation for assets, and automated scheduling for distribution, are not outworking their competitors. They are operating at a marginal cost approaching 0, while everyone else is still billing hours. You build automated B2B outreach that qualifies leads and books calls without a single human in the sequence. You build SaaS products on micro-subscription architecture, generating recurring revenue while you sleep. The marginal cost of replicating software is exactly 0. The marginal cost of distributing media to 100 million people is exactly 0. Every incremental unit of growth after the initial build goes straight to margin. That is not a business model, that is a monopoly math equation. You must permanently detach your time from your income. You must evolve from a grinding gear inside the system into the architect of the system itself. Before you enter any negotiation, before you price any offer, before you structure any partnership, run this audit. 3 questions, no deflection. Question 1. If you disappeared from your 3 largest client relationships tomorrow, not left, not resigned, but vanished, what breaks for them? What stops building? What revenue halts? Question 2. If your largest client disappeared tomorrow, what breaks for you? Question 3. What would it cost them to replace your system? In time, in migration, in retraining, in the institutional memory that lives nowhere else? What would it cost you to replace their revenue? The ratio of those answers is your current leverage position. If their cost to remove you is larger than your cost to replace them, you have leverage. If the ratio is inverted, you are a vendor, and vendors compete on price. I knew Rome's answers to all 3 questions before I ever allowed Caesar into the room. That is not intelligence. That is due diligence on your own architecture. Power is not what you have. Power is what the room believes you have. In every high-stakes negotiation I conducted, the true leverage was never disclosed. I never allowed Rome's ambassadors to audit Egypt's grain reserves. I never revealed the depth of the treasury. I never showed the structural fragility of the alliance. I blinded them with excess and let them conclude the rest. In 2026, the equivalent behaviour is this. You do not show a prospect your pipeline capacity in the discovery call. You do not reveal your operational limits in the first meeting. You do not negotiate from need. You negotiate from architecture. The anti-pattern. Most consultants walk into a pricing conversation, having already prepared the justification, before the client has even asked. That preparation is the signal. The room reads it before a word is spoken. When you price your next high-ticket offer, state the number. And hold the silence. Do not flinch. Do not explain. Do not apologise for the price. The first person to speak in that silence loses all the frame. When a buyer believes you do not need them, your value doubles. When they sense you need this deal to survive, your price halves. The architecture of power begins not in the boardroom, but in the internal certainty that your system works, with or without this particular client. Empires are not built by the hardest workers. They are built by the architects of leverage, who understand that the most powerful position in any market is the one everyone else depends on. Rome is now a tourist destination. Alexandria is underwater. But the operating logic I used to protect an empire from the most powerful military force in history, using only a supply chain and a precisely managed perception. That logic is sitting on your desk right now, formatted as software, as AI infrastructure, as content distribution. Subscribe, because next time we go deeper into the exact mechanics that turn a single dependency into a category you own entirely. The throne of your market is not occupied. It is waiting for the architect who understands leverage. I am Cleopatra. And the most powerful asset I ever built was never an army. It was a dependency that no one realized they had until they could not remove it.